Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Shelley Pruitt, and my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts. Good evening, gentlemen.
What's up?
Good evening.
Good evening. Oh, okay. Gonna go a little Transylvanian count there, huh?
Sure, why not?
Why not? Well, we've got one that is probably, it's been a fascination of mine for a while tonight, and that is the real life serial killer that the book and the Showtime series Dexter is based on, and his name is Pedro Rodrigues Filho. And I really, when I started looking at this, I knew that it had been based on a real person, but a lot of it was pulled from this person. Now, there have been a lot of copycats since then that have been inspired by Dexter, the Showtime series, but a lot of what the book is based on is on this man, the darkly dreaming Dexter, series of novels. So do you know anything about the real life Dexter? Did you watch the Showtime series?
I watched some of it. My ex-girlfriend was really into Dexter. And I watched a few of the seasons. I've heard that the first run of the series ended really badly, but I never watched that part of it. But it was a lot of fun. It was really interesting. What about you, Blake?
I have never watched a single episode, so I'm in it. I'm in for it tonight, I'm sure.
Well, then I will make sure that I give you a little clue as to what Dexter is all about. Okay?
Well, I'm excited that we're getting back to a little true crime.
This is a little true crime, but there is a little paranormal in it as well. So we do have a little touch of something that's vaguely paranormal.
Okay.
So, all right, guys, let's go. So, Dexter. It's the popular and terrifying series on Showtime that's based on the book Darkly Dreaming Dexter by Jeff Lindsay. And this series aired from October 1st, 2006 to September 22nd of 2013. And the story follows the life and the crimes of antihero Dexter Morgan. Dexter works for the Miami Police Department on the forensic team as a blood spatter analyst. And the job allowed him the ability to do what he is seemingly compelled to do: kill and then cover it up. Dexter leads a secret parallel life as a vigilante serial killer, hunting down criminals who have somehow escaped proper justice due to legal technicalities or due to corruption. And Dexter is a serial killer that only kills bad people. He is a killer with a conscience, a moral code, if you will. And by adhering to this code, the vigilante murderer found a way to channel his dark urges into something that he considered positive or justified. Now, the character of Dexter witnessed his mother's brutal slaying when he was just 2 years old, and he was taken in by a cop named Harry Morgan, who recognized Dexter had a very dark side, and he taught him this code to keep him safe. Charming, shy, unassuming, witty, and more than a little broken, Dexter has all the characteristics that make us root for the serial killer. Now, the character of Dexter Morgan was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, or APD. Now, in layman's terms, a psychopath. Okay?
Okay.
Exactly.
So is that what, have you been diagnosed with that, Shelley? Is that what you're trying to say?
Now, in the Diagnostic and Standard Manual of Mental Disorders, APD is defined as, and this is the definition of it, a person that follows a pattern of disregard and violation of the rights of others occurring since the age of 15 years. So it's something that shows itself very early. And this pattern includes 7 factors, 3 which must be met in order to get the antisocial personality disorder diagnosis. And that is the failure to conform to social norms, irritability and aggressiveness, and a lack of remorse. Now, it's interesting to note that psychopaths are not insane. They know the difference between right and wrong, and not all psychopaths are serial killers, and not all serial killers are psychopaths. Okay, so you can be one, but not necessarily be the other.
Okay.
I feel like Shelly is on the cusp of like pulling out her presentation slides and being like, "Here we are. This is it. Like I'm about to school you," and so y'all hold on.
All right, so here we go.
By definition, a lot of CEOs and politicians and like people who excel in their field are diagnosed psychopaths, if I'm not mistaken.
They are.
Yeah,
they are, but that does not make them a serial killer.
No, not at all.
So let me muddy the waters even further here by giving you the FBI's definition for assigning the label of a serial killer. Okay, and that is a person or persons. Yes, there have been serial killing teams committing a series of 3 or more killings, having common characteristics as to suggest the reasonable possibility that the crimes were committed by the same individual or individuals over a period of time, with separations between the murders. Basically, that separation of time between the murders is their cooling off period, and there's no specific length of time for these separations. It could be, a day, it could be a month, it could be a year, it could be a decade, it could be 3 decades. As long as there is a series of time between the murders, and there are at least 3. Some say 2, but really their standard is kind of 3 because you have to establish the pattern.
But the periods of time do get shorter and shorter in between.
Yes, and that is called escalation. And escalation is determined when the length of time between the murder or the killer's cooling off period begins to shorten. So now, during these escalation periods, when this cooling off period shortens, most killers begin to devolve, which means that they fall very deeply into their rhetoric and their motivations, their hallucinations, their codes, and they become more reckless and more indiscriminate. And this is usually when they get caught. It's whenever they let their guard down and they stop being careful. Yes, they get sloppy. And while there is no generic profile of a serial murderer, there are certain traits common to serial murderers, including sensation seeking, lack of remorse or guilt, impulsivity, the need for control, and predatory behavior. And the label of serial killer is generic, but there are subcategories based on motivation.
I told you there'd be slides.
That's right. So we're going to get to this because I want you to understand this guy. So under the broad topic of a serial killer, there are 2 main categories. One is act focused, and the act focused killer kills very quickly. And under that, there's 2 subcategories. There's the visionary killer, and he kills because he hears voices or has visions directing him to do so. And then you have the missionary killer, which kills because he believes he is meant to rid society of a particular group of people. Now, if you pop over to the other side, it says that there are process-focused serial killers. And these are the killers that kill very slowly, getting enjoyment from the torture and slow death of their victims. And these fall into 2 categories. The first is the hedonist. And under that are the lust-driven killers, the one who derives sexual pleasure from killing. The thrill killers, the ones that get a kick or adrenaline rush from murdering. And then the gain killers. They kill because they believe they will profit in some way. And then the last part of this wonderful little flow chart are the power seekers. And they are the ones that want to play God or be in charge of life and death. And they live among us. The character of Dexter is based on a real man, a very violent, calculating, dangerous man, Pedro Rodrigues Filho. Now, Pedro Rodrigues Sr. and his wife Manuela lived on a farm in Santa Rita de Sapacay in southern Brazil. They were expecting the first child. And with only weeks to go, Manuela was excited and eager to meet her new baby. They didn't have much money, but they got by. And Pedro Sr. was a night security guard at the local school and was, by all accounts, a calm and pleasant man. when he was sober.
Hmm.
Now, when he drank, he was a nasty, vicious drunk with a violent temper. And when he was drunk and angry, Manuela was usually on the receiving end of his outbursts. He regularly beat Manuela in his drunken stupors. And during one of his violent outbursts, while Manuela was heavily pregnant, he beat her with a viciousness that was unlike the others. He pummeled her with his fist and stomped her with his boots and kicked her repeatedly in the stomach. Her injuries had not yet healed when she gave birth to their first son, Pedro Rodrigues Filho. Now, Filho in Portuguese means junior, so she named him after his father. So that is just a taste of what's coming, you guys. So be aware, this is going to be a very triggering episode. I barely got through that part. It's triggering for me. It's going to be a very triggering episode, so everybody just be ready, okay? On June 17th of 1954, the baby was born with a deformed skull and brain damage due to the severe beating that Manuela suffered. He had a dent in his skull that never corrected itself and damage to his prefrontal cortex as a result of being kicked in the head in utero by his father. Baby Pedro's life was awash with violence before he was even born, and he was lucky to be born at all. So Pedro Filho had prefrontal cortex damage at birth, and the prefrontal cortex is responsible for our decision making,
right,
our emotional regulation, and moderating your social behavior. It works like an emergency brake. You know, you want to punch someone, but you don't. That's your prefrontal cortex telling you not to do it. It's not worth going to jail.
So does that mean that mine's underdeveloped? If I just
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and
so that's your real brain telling your primal lizard brain to shut the fuck up.
Exactly.
Not your primal lizard brain.
Well, that's exactly right, because the prefrontal cortex works with the amygdala to detect emotional stress and validate or invalidate information, and that's your fight or flight response, which is your lizard brain. That's exactly right, Brian.
Yeah.
So someone with a damaged prefrontal cortex and with a damaged or missing connection to the amygdala is more likely to punch someone in the face and display irregular patterns of emotional and social behavior due to a lack of empathy. So this kid comes out like this. Now, Pedro Filho was the first of 7 children, and although the family was poor, they didn't live in poverty like many of the people around them. They seemed to always have just enough money to put food on the table. And the area the family lived in was fraught with crime, and young Pedro witnessed violence daily, both inside and outside his home. He was very, very close to his mother, who did her best to protect him from his father, but she was rarely successful. Pedro suffered many merciless beatings at the hands of his violent father. But Pedro did find time and found solace in spending time with his grandparents, his grandfather in particular. His grandfather Joaquim took Pedro under his wing and taught him how to swim and plant and harvest, and he taught him how to hunt and how to fight. Joaquim was determined to teach the child everything that he needed to know about how to survive. And the grandfather was also determined to instill a strong work ethic in the child. So from a very young age, Pedro would go to work with his grandfather. And Joaquim was a butcher. In that shop, Pedro learned how to properly carve up an ox carcass with nothing wasted, not even the blood. Pedro's grandmother taught him that drinking the blood of the ox would give him strength. And Pedro wanted to be strong.
That sounds so unsanitary. I'm like, no, let's.
He's just walking around with a tumbler. He's like, excuse me.
He's like, cheers, mate. It's good.
I'm gonna warn you now, don't eat during this episode.
Like instead of the milk commercials we have, it's just Pedro on screen like ox blood. Like,
just a Jack Pedro just brooding. Starbucks is for pussies.
Now, Joaquim and his wife did what they could to mold Pedro into a worthy, hardworking, good young man. By the time Pedro was 13, he was the most fearless and determined of all of his classmates, despite his relatively small size. But the family But family was the most important thing to Pedro. That had been instilled in him by his grandparents. And as the eldest, he felt a great responsibility to help to provide for his 6 younger siblings. Pedro would go hunting in the jungle for game and fish to help put food on the table. And when he was a teenager, he got a job in a chicken slaughterhouse to bring in extra money for the family.
Hmm.
Now, one of his most defining qualities was his sense of fairness. It was black and white, right or wrong, with no gray area in between.
Uh-oh.
So, hold on, quick question though. Is that because of the deformity that he was born with, do you think?
That perhaps is a question, is it
Perhaps.
nature, is it nurture? For
Okay.
after.
Okay.
Now, when Pedro was 13, he borrowed his cousin's horse without asking, because this is 1954 and they're in, the outskirts of Brazil here. So,
Right.
horses were still, and he worked on a farm. So there were horses. So he borrowed his cousin's horse without asking. Now, I could never find Pedro's cousin's name, so I'm going to call him Ramon because I got tired of typing Pedro's cousin over and over in my
Okay.
thing. So we're going to call him Ramon, even though I could never find his name. Ramon. Now, whenever he returned the animal and attempted to give an explanation, his older and much larger cousin Ramon punched him in the face.
Oh.
Shocked and furious, Pedro regained his balance, and he stared Ramon dead in the eyes, and he told him, "I am going to kill you."
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Well, to add insult to injury, Ramon laughed at him and punched him again. To Pedro, this was a unforgivable injustice. And this is the first time he felt the overwhelming urge to kill.
Wait, and he's how old at this point?
13.
13. Wow. Okay.
And that feeling grew stronger as the story of the punching spread around the family like wildfire. Family members teased him about being weak and getting his ass whipped. And Pedro's rage at the injustice of the matter grew more and more with each passing day. And one day, Pedro and Ramon were helping their grandfather Joaquin at a sugarcane factory. The boys had been given the task of loading the sugarcane into a pressing machine. And the heavy-duty machine had 2 huge steel rollers to crush the cane and squeeze out the juice.
Oh, shit.
Pedro had not forgotten about the punches. He had not forgotten the humiliation. And he had not forgotten his rage. And as they worked, Pedro waited for the perfect moment. And when they were left alone, Pedro suddenly grabbed Ramon and violently shoved him against the steel rollers.
Oh, shit.
Ramon's arm was immediately sucked up by the metal jaws of the machine and mangled all the way to the shoulder. But the rest of his body wouldn't go in. So Pedro grabbed his wailing cousin by the hair and tried to force his head between the now bloody rollers.
Oh, my God.
And when he realized that that wasn't going to work, he grabbed a nearby machete that was used for chopping the sugarcane and began to hack at Ramon.
Oh, my God.
Pedro was determined to chop him into small pieces and feed them into the machine. Now, Ramon's screams alerted the other workers, and they raised the alarm. And Pedro was stopped, and he spent the next few days in jail. But because the family depended on his income, they told the police that they weren't going to be filing charges. And because Pedro was a minor, only 13 years old, he was released to his family. But he did get a punishment. He was told that he would have to clean his cousin's flesh and blood from the sugarcane press.
Oh, man.
Ooh.
It only took him 4 weeks.
Oh, God.
Oh my God. Good God. At 13 years old that you have this, I don't know, this
urge
overwhelming
to kill, but
urge. I mean, not that, but come on,
Yeah.
that's not just killed. That's like maim. Like
Yeah,
you're out to hurt.
He not only was he, because his brain ain't right. So,
Yeah.
so not only was he angry about that, but he also suffered humiliation, which is going to make it 10 times worse.
Right,
Mhm.
right. Ooh.
Now,
He's just like,
yeah.
sweet victory.
Now, Ramon lived, but his punching arm was permanently mangled. And Pedro never expressed any remorse for his actions because he wasn't sorry. He would tell this story at family gatherings as if it was a funny anecdote, while his cousin
Oh my
Ramon
God.
sat there with his disfigured arm mutilated up to the shoulder.
Hey, you remember that time?
What?
Good times.
Oh my god! Wait! So like oh my god, family reunions, and he's in the room, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this one time I got pissed off at my cousin."
He's like,
I
Ramon, show
shoved
him your
him."
arm, dude.
Sorry, I'm not laughing. I'm just like serious. Like I am laughing, but not at what happened to Ramon. At the
he says at the family
what
reunion,
the fuck?
"Come here, cousin, give me some sugar."
I'm like, moral of the story: don't bully your cousins.
No, especially if they have
Now-
brain damage.
Now it was very clear that something had changed in Pedro. The satisfaction of getting justice or revenge had made him feel alive and powerful, and he began to wonder how it would actually feel to kill someone. And this is where Pedro's psychopathy as an injustice collector emerges. The FBI terms an injustice collector as a criminal who accumulates perceived grievances and slights and often feels victimized. And once fixated, they will seek retribution for the acts, often leading to extremist actions, violent behavior. And in their attempts to right the wrong, the situation is often escalated through means of violence or murder. Now, about a year later, Pedro's father was accused of stealing food from the school kitchen where he worked as a night guard. Now, Pedro Sr. adamantly denied the allegation. He had worked at that school for over 12 years without a single incident. Sure, he was a drunk and vicious abuser, but he wasn't a damn thief. And Pedro Sr. told his boss that the actual thief was the day guard. But they didn't listen. Pedro Rodrigues Sr. was fired by the deputy mayor of Santa Rita and labeled a thief within the community. Now, life was already tough for the family, and they needed every income to survive. And being branded a thief made finding another job nearly impossible because no one wanted to hire a thief. Now, young Pedro, he helped as much as he could, doing any extra work that he could find, but it just wasn't enough. He walked in and found his mother crying about the family's desperate situation. And Pedro felt that familiar sense of injustice return.
Oh, shit.
His throat went dry, and the thirst for revenge returned. Pedro needed to think. He took his grandfather's rifle, a machete, and a tent, and he took off into the mountains, where he stayed by himself in the wilderness, hunting and living off the land. And 30 days passed before Pedro returned with a plan. And it was a good one. It was a full moon that night, and the eerie glow reflected off the streets. A cold breeze swirled as Pedro crouched in the shadows outside the home of the deputy mayor.
Oh, shit.
His hands gripped his grandfather's .36 caliber rifle as he waited patiently to hear the sound of the man's Jeep arriving. Finally, a low rumble echoed through the silence, and headlights cut the darkness. And without hesitation, Pedro leapt from his hiding place and began shooting at the Jeep. The deputy mayor slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the vehicle and began running in the opposite direction. Pedro calmly leveled the rifle, took aim, and squeezed the trigger. And the deputy mayor lay dead in the street.
Damn.
Pedro Rodrigues Filho had taken his first life. He was 14.
Jesus.
Good Lord.
Now, the rush of adrenaline was enthralling. He had avenged his father. It was righteous, and it was like nothing he had ever experienced before. He had killed the man that had fired his father. But the job wasn't finished. There was still one more. Pedro left the scene and made his way to the school. He snuck inside and hid in the storeroom, waiting for the day guard to come on duty. And finally, the man who could have prevented this entire chain of events, the man who was actually responsible, turned the doorknob. When the man entered the room, Pedro pulled a gun and held him at gunpoint and forced him to sit in a chair. The killing of the deputy mayor had been too quick, and Pedro wanted the man to know why he was going to kill him. Pedro explained to the man that he was there to punish him, to exact justice for his father. And according to interviews with Pedro, he said that he looked the man in the eye and said to him, "Do you see what you did? It destroyed my family. My brothers are starving because of you. Is it fair that you did this?" The guard burst into tears and began pleading for his life. But the pleas fell on deaf ears. There was no opportunity to repent. Pedro pulled the trigger and shot him dead. He covered the body with boxes and chairs and then set the storeroom on fire and walked out.
Damn.
What the
This dude is
fuck?
the Punisher. I like that's exactly who this is.
I mean, this is like,
holy shit.
It's like, I'm not just going to kill,
Yeah.
I'm going to overkill. I'm
Right.
going to make sure that you are dead.
Right.
I mean, his cousin with the machete in the arm, and now this dude with the good God.
This dude is a comic book character.
Pedro decided from then on that he would explain to his victims the reason they were being punished, much like the character of Dexter with the monologue.
Mm-hmm.
Because you see, he felt like they needed to understand. Now, he's still 14.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, the police were on to him. And Pedro quickly realized that he needed to get out of town. Now, it might not have been the smartest move to go after people that he'd had a vendetta against. So he fled the city and he went to Sao Paulo to stay with his grandmother. Now, in the big city, he needed a job, and it wasn't long before he hooked up with the local drug trafficking gang led by a woman known as Bethina. And even though he was young and a bit small, Pedro was lean and good-looking and muscular. So Bethina took the 14-year-old into her home and took his virginity, otherwise known as statutory rape.
Yeah.
But Pedro became one of Bethina's favorites, and because of his relationship with her, he was given higher-ranking positions within the gang. And this angered some of the older members of the group, and quiet plans were hatched to rid themselves of Pedro. One day, 3 of the gang members invited Pedro to a nearby lagoon to smoke a little weed and go for a swim. Pedro thought it sounded like fun, and he agreed, and they began walking. But on the way there, Pedro got a bad feeling. The conversation seemed forced, and his 3 friends were acting nervous. Pedro tried to stay calm as he scanned the group, and then he noticed that their hands were on their weapons. Without hesitation, Pedro drew his gun. Surprised, the men stopped dead in their tracks, and Pedro ordered them to toss their guns. The men complied. They threw down their weapons, and all 3 turned and ran. Pedro began firing, shooting 2 of the men dead and wounding 1 who escaped. And he felt that killing the 2 men was justified because they had come to kill him. And after that, he got the nickname Pedrinho Cartuchera, or Pedro Cartridge, because his favorite weapon was a sawed-off shotgun. Hey, you like me throwing in Portuguese words?
So far, so good. We'll give you a final rating.
Thank you. So, Pedro continued working as a drug trafficker, and his specialty was ripping off other drug dealers. He pulled a robbery on a well-known drug dealer in the region that went by the name China. He stole China's drugs and guns and sold them to another dealer. See, China wasn't the forgive and forget type. China was dangerous. But Pedro didn't care. He didn't like China when he met him. Pedro thought he was a liar and a cheat and a thief. So ripping him off was just payback for his misdeeds. See, Pedro never really thought about consequences. And there was no way that he could have foreseen how this decision would backfire on him in the worst possible way. So now Brazil in the 1960s, let me tell you a little bit about this. The streets were overrun with crime and criminals. Drug traffickers, street kids, and ordinary citizens knew it was dangerous and that death could lie in wait just around the corner. And death could come from a rival gang member, a neighbor, or even the police. The Brazilian military dictatorship had established the Esquadra da Morte, which is the death squad. And the death squad was based on vigilantism, and their MO was to capture, torture, and execute those they deemed to be a danger to society. It was, in short, government-sanctioned murder. Mm-hmm. And the death squads operated heavily from the 1960s to the 1980s, and they still exist in some parts of Brazil today.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the squads were mostly made up of military and off-duty police officers, and they were prolific and feared by all criminals. And in the area of Sao Paulo, where Pedro lived at this time, these death squads also included individual gunmen that were government sanctions to carry out its extrajudicial killings. I can get the Portuguese words. I can't get the
It's the English ones, yeah.
Yeah. Now, after Pedro had robbed drug dealer China, he knew he had to be extra careful and lay low. And he tried to never stay anywhere too long. He was paranoid, but is it paranoia if they're really trying to kill you? He spent his nights sleeping inside of cars and in church cemeteries, hiding anywhere he could from his rivals and the police. But he continued to work with Bethina in the drug trade. He and Bethina and a few other gang members one night had gone to do a deal and sell some product. And the deal was going well until they were ambushed by the police and everyone started shooting.
Oh, shit.
Bethina was riddled with bullets and lay dead on the floor.
Oh, hell.
Pedro scrambled for cover but was shot. But he somehow managed to get away. But he was shaken, and it was time to move on. But he didn't go far. Pedro decided to lay low with some extended family members that lived just on the edge of the city. And this part of Pedro's family practiced a syncretic religion, which is known as candomblé. Now, FYI, a syncretic religion is a combination of various belief systems. Candomblé is a folk religion that's practiced in South America, especially Brazil. And it's a combination of the African religions of Bantu, Yoruba, and Fon. And it incorporates aspects of the Roman Catholic faith.
So it's like Santeria, kind of.
It's very close to Santeria,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, the Santeria is the Afro-Caribbean mixed with the Catholic. And this one is actually African, Yoruba, and Bantu and Fon.
Okay.
So now, candomblé also incorporates some elements of black magic and spell casting. And many practitioners cast spells to cause their enemies physical harm, financial ruin, or even death. But they can also cast powerful spells of protection. And Pedro decided he needed one of those. So he asked his family to perform a ritual on him that would protect his body from those who wished to do him harm. They agreed, but his aunt wanted to make sure that Pedro understood what he was asking for. His aunt explained that the core beliefs of their religion regarded good and evil as irrelevant. Instead, Pedro would be accepting a duty to fulfill his life's purpose at any cost, while being fully aware that causing harm to anyone would come back to him.
Ah.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
pretty big tenet of magic in general. You know,
Yeah,
whenever you
yeah,
do to someone
yeah.
comes back to you. Was it sevenfold, Blake, or tenfold?
Usually it's tenfold.
Depends on the religion,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, yeah, it just depends on the religion. It's either threefold or tenfold. I've heard
Mhm.
both. Typical of what you find, I guess, where we're at. Depending
Yeah.
on what you study or practice.
Yes. And so she wanted him to understand that the protection would be given up front and the cost would be repaid for the rest of his life. Pedro accepted the terms and the preparation for the ritual began. Trigger warning. Pedro's old uncle told him to pick a coconut and to remove all of the hair. Once he had done that, he was to fill it with gunpowder and fit it with a wick. Pedro also needed to procure a black cat and 7 string beans. When all the items were collected, Pedro took them to his uncle, and they were ready. Pedro, his uncle, and several other practitioners arrived at twilight in a deserted quarry, and the ritual began. Pedro was instructed to kill the cat, drink its blood, and cover himself in its organs.
No thanks.
No, not the kitty.
Once covered in the sacrifice, Pedro was instructed to fill the body of the animal with the seeds and to bury it.
Whew.
While Pedro carried out his gruesome task, a group danced around him, and the drumming and the singing continued into the early hours of the morning. But the ritual was not yet complete. 1 week later, Pedro had to dig up the cat and remove the seeds. His uncle then threaded them onto a necklace and gave it to Pedro, telling him to never, ever remove it. And as far as he was concerned, 16-year-old Pedro was now invincible.
Oh, hell.
What happened to the coconut cannonball he made?
They never said.
Okay.
I could not find what that was for.
Okay.
And that might be something that is
Like a symbolic
extra,
thing, maybe.
It might be something that's extra secretive that,
Yeah.
that he didn't want to explain, but that is the explanation that was given.
That is some pretty deep ritualistic shit right there, because
Yeah.
I mean, you're basically taking life but then returning to the earth.
Yeah.
Ew. Ooh.
And then resurrecting it again in the form of the seeds.
Yeah. Which
Now,
obviously is the form of life, if you will. You know, I mean, seed represents life in a lot of stuff.
Right.
Damn, that's tough. No thanks. I'll pass. No,
Now,
I'm not
trust me, I made that as short as I could, you guys. It's just
Yeah.
very gruesome. Now, in his autobiography, Pedro stated, "From then on, the cops opened fire, but the bullets didn't hit me. The enemies attacked, and I defended myself with ease. Nothing would stop me. Before, I was afraid, but after the ceremony, it was as if nothing could affect me again." Now, in other interviews, Pedro said he regarded himself as a defender of the weak, like a Robin Hood character, stealing food to feed the hungry and exacting his own brand of vigilante justice upon those who harmed women.
They got any of those spells and rituals for money problems or something?
I don't know.
I mean, because
I did not delve into Candomblé. I did not delve into it.
okay, I was gonna say. I mean, I'm not willing to wear the blood of a sacrificial animal, but
blood and the organs. You had to drink the blood and wear the organs.
No, I'm good. I'm good. But I mean, if there's something that's like, hey, just stay in your room for like 3 days and sleep, I got that. I can do that.
Well, with his newfound sense of purpose, Pedro decided it was time to get out of Sao Paulo, and the young man made his way to Campo Grande in Rio de Janeiro. Not long after arriving in the city, Pedro met the love of his life, Maria Abracida Olimpia. And shortly after they met, Maria became pregnant. Now, Pedro got them a small shanty and they moved in together. He was actually very excited to be a father. And he was fiercely protective of Maria and hired a man to keep her safe. But he still continued his Robin Hood activities of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. And he had made quite a name for himself in the slums of Rio. And the locals began helping Pedro. They warned him when his enemies were in the area, and they would lie to the police when they came sniffing around looking for Pedro. But the community couldn't protect Pedro from everyone. Word had gotten out that Pedro was living in Rio. And one evening, Pedro returned home to find his Maria and the man that he had hired to protect her viciously slaughtered.
Uh-oh.
Maria was 7 months pregnant at the time.
Shit.
Yeah.
He let out a wail that echoed through the streets. His dreams of being a husband and a father had been savagely stolen from him. And with a rage in his chest like he had never known before, he swore on his dead wife and unborn child that he would find the person responsible and make them pay.
This is this man's origin story
This
here. This is the origin story moment right here.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
Now, Pedro's list of enemies was so long that he didn't even know where to start. So for the next year of his life, he went about kidnapping and torturing anyone he believed could have information. But to no avail. And after many months with no luck, Pedro went to drown his sorrows at a local bar. Sitting on the bar stool, head in his hands, one of his informants approached him. And the informant told him that there was a woman from out of town that was looking for him and wanted to meet. Pedro agreed, and he was told where to find the woman, and off he went. And when he found her, he approached cautiously. Now, knowing Pedro's reputation, the woman quickly told him that she had information about Maria. The woman was the scorned ex-wife of China. Yes, that China.
Yeah.
The feared and ferocious drug dealer that Pedro had stolen from several years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
The woman said that it was China who had ordered the murder of Pedro's wife. Now, Pedro was unsure if he should trust this woman. But to prove her identity, she showed Pedro cuts and bruises and scars that she had received at the hands of China during their violent marriage. Pedro did many things, but he did not beat or harm women. It was an act that he could never condone. He had watched his mother be savagely attacked for years and had wanted to protect her but couldn't. Her injuries convinced Pedro. And wasting no time, he went on the hunt for China. Didn't take long for him to find out that China and many of his gang members would be attending a wedding. So Pedro summoned 2 of his most trusted friends, and the men made their way to the ceremony.
Oh my God.
As they closed in, Pedro paused and warned the men that if any women or children were harmed, they would have to deal with him. Otherwise, every man at the ceremony was to receive a bullet. The men readied themselves, and Pedro opened the door. The room exploded in gunfire, and the walls of the room were splattered red. Bodies began to pile up on the floor, and the screams of the wedding guests were drowned out by the sounds of gunfire. It was a total bloodbath. And when it was done, Pedro and his men casually walked away. They calmly walked into a bar, sat down, and had a few drinks. Pedro had killed 7 men and wounded 16 that night. And the massacre earned Pedro the legendary status in the criminal world of Sao Paulo with a new nickname, Pedrinho Matador, or Pedro the Killer.
Jesus.
Tarantino movie. This is crazy.
God damn. I'm like, okay. Why is speaking of why is there not ever been a movie about this man?
That's what I said. The Tarantino.
I mean, I get why there probably hasn't, but I'm not saying about him. But why has there not been something like a storyline like this? That like, anyways, I know this is a real. I'm not trying to play down the real. Well, yeah, I have, but I'm just saying, like, I'm not trying to play down what he's doing or the victims or anything like that. I'm just like the way it's reading and coming across, it's like a fucking Hollywood movie.
Oh yeah.
But this is real. This
is a real life story.
Christ.
Now,
this is an interesting story.
Became known that Pedro Filho was a man who knew no fear and would go to any lengths to exact his vengeance on any man who dared to wrong him. He was feared by other criminals and now feared by the death squads. And he loved how others would tremble in his presence. He reveled in his newfound notoriety, and he had the words, "Eu mato por prazer," I kill for pleasure, tattooed on his left arm. And on his right arm, he tattooed Maria. And next to it, the words, I can kill for love. Now, during an interview later in his life, Pedro stated that he was killing someone every single day.
Damn.
If a day passed that he didn't kill someone, he said he couldn't sleep. And Pedro also claimed that he drank the blood of all of his victims, believing, as his grandmother had taught him, that it would give him strength.
This is gross. Ugh.
And after the wedding massacre, the authorities were closing in on Pedro. On May 24th of 1973, Pedro and a few of his friends were ambushed by the police. And after a long and intense shootout, Pedro woke up in the hospital handcuffed to the bed. He had been shot multiple times, but he was still alive. And the room was buzzing with nurses, police officers, and news cameras. Members of the press were eager to interview now 18-year-old Pedrinho Matador.
He's only 18?
He's 18. After the shootout with the police, Pedro spent a month in the hospital recovering from his injuries, with news cameras constantly in his face and a constant police presence. His face was plastered all over newspapers and television screens, and people were fascinated by the story of Pedrinho Matador, who they dubbed the People's Avenger. Now, once Pedro recovered from his gunshot wounds, he was ready to be taken to prison. And he was given the choice to be put in protective custody or general population. Well, fearless as ever, he chose Gen Pop.
Put me in, Gen Pop.
He was admitted and walked to his cell surrounded by the countless enemies that waited for their chance to exact revenge on Pedrinho Matador. Now, when Pedro's court date arrived, he was taken to the courtroom and the list of charges was read. He was being charged with 18 murders. And Pedro got angry. He felt as if his legacy wasn't being done justice. So he stated to the court that he had in fact killed well over 100 men.
He actually the judge.
Yeah, right. He's like, actually.
But by the end of the trial, it was determined there was only enough evidence to prosecute Pedro for 14 of the murders, not even the original 18 he was charged with. And Pedro was sentenced to 126 years in prison.
Dang.
Now, police records state that after the verdict, these are police records, Pedro was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police van to be transported to the prison. He was put in the van with another criminal, a convicted rapist.
Oh, shit.
Oh, God.
And when the van pulled away from the courthouse, it went straight to the prison. The police opened the back of the van when they arrived, and they found Pedro calmly sitting next to the dead body of the other prisoner. Because Pedro had sought vengeance yet again. Rape was a crime that Pedro detested above all others, and he couldn't see fit to let the man live.
What the So he's like, well, they didn't give me my 18, so I'm just gonna right here.
Mm-hmm.
He was sitting next to a convicted rapist.
Yeah. Wow.
So Pedro was admitted to the current, here we go, one of the Portuguese words, Carandiru prison. And it was one of the most brutal prisons in Brazil. Understaffed, under-equipped, unsanitary, and teeming with vermin and violent gangs. Many of the prison guards cooperated with the prison gangs through bribery or risked being murdered on the inside or even in their own homes. So the prisoners were pretty much left to govern themselves and do whatever they wanted. And Pedro was 18 when he entered this chaotic world. He wrote in his autobiography, by the time I went through processing, I began to understand what I would go through. The cell was small. There was no mattress. There was nothing, just the frozen concrete floor. There was no shower. It was just a water nozzle. There was no toilet. There was only a hole in the floor. And to make matters worse, Pedro's celebrity status had put a target on his back. And it didn't take long for someone to challenge him. In the prison yard, Pedro was jumped by 5 other inmates, and Pedro fought with ferociousness. And in the chaos, he was able to kill 3 of the men and severely wound the other 2, emerging victorious from the fight.
Damn.
Jesus.
This 18-year-old, this 18-year-old had just kicked 5 grown men's asses, and the entire yard was witness to the display of dominance. They had seen the deadly and fearless side of Pedrinho Matador. And after that, very few dared to step to him again. And in prison, he resumed his role as vigilante and continued to kill. He murdered an additional 48 inmates.
Damn.
What the fuck? Like, I mean, come on. Like, you don't think it, I don't know, the one that happened in the back of the van would be enough to put him in his own cell by himself away from Gen Pop? But no, let's just continue to throw him in with general population.
Well, hold on. Now, we know that maybe there's some people in prison that other people want gone, so maybe guards are getting paid to look the other direction and have him in general population.
Yeah, but still, Jesus, 48 more?
Mm-hmm.
You know, though, that first fight, though, where he had, like, the 5 men, everybody, like, he emerged victorious, and they were like, oh, fuck that. I ain't messing with that fool. Like,
I am El Matador.
How the fuck are you getting this voice, right?
I don't know. But Matador in Portuguese is killer. Not bullfighter, it's killer.
I know.
So, but regardless of his crimes, his mother still loved him deeply, and she and his grandmother visited him every week in prison. Pedro looked forward to the visits. They made him happy. But that happiness was short-lived. One afternoon, while exercising in the prison yard, he was approached by a guard and taken to the prison director's office. And the director told Pedro that his mother, Manuela, had been stabbed to death in her sleep.
Uh-oh.
Pedro demanded the name of the killer.
Shit.
The director paused and revealed that the killer was Pedro's father.
Oh, no.
Pedro
Oh,
wanted
shit.
the details. He told the director not to leave anything out. And with a bit of caution in his voice, the director gave the account as he understood it to be. Manuela was stabbed 21 times with a machete by his father.
Jesus Christ.
And after killing his mother, his father also attempted to murder Pedro's brothers, but they had managed to escape with the help of a neighbor. Pedro's father had been arrested and was awaiting sentencing. And that familiar rage began to burn in Pedro's chest again.
Oh, hell.
In an interview with Comeda, a Brazilian podcast, Pedro revealed that his father's family had never liked his mother, and that they had actually lied to Pedro Sr., telling him that Manuela had been cheating on him. Pedro explained that in his culture, a wife cheating on her husband is an unforgivable crime and on many occasions has led to murder. But Pedro adamantly insisted that his mother was the holiest woman in Brazil, and that the lie was part of his father's side of the family's plan to get rid of Manuela. Now, a judge did allow Pedro to attend his mother's funeral. And standing before her coffin, he swore a solemn oath to his mother that he would avenge her pain and avenge her murder.
Yeah, shit.
He swore to her that he would kill his father and eat his heart.
Oh, hell.
Anybody got a steamroller cane presser sitting around anywhere? Just curious.
A week after the funeral, his father's sister showed up at the prison with a peace offering, a cake that she had baked just for him. Now, Pedro was suspicious, and instead of eating the cake himself,
Don't do it.
he shared it with his cellmates and gave a few pieces to the stray dogs that the prisoners kept. And within minutes, everyone who ate the cake, including the dogs, became violently ill and began to vomit. The remaining bits of cake were checked by a lab and were confirmed to have been laced with large quantities of poison.
You tried it.
Mm-hmm.
So for his own safety, Pedro was moved to a different prison. And that prison just so happened to be the same prison in which Pedro Rodrigues Sr. was housed.
Hello, Father.
Why? You see his track record. Why? Like,
He may have called in a few favors. Maybe.
still,
Now
why?
Possibility.
There are several variations on the next part of the story, but here is the most accurate from what I can determine where the accounts match up the best. One night, Pedro lured a guard into his cell by pretending to be sick. And when the guard entered, Pedro jumped him and held a knife to his neck. He took the guard's keys and gun and locked him in the cell. Using the gun, he forced the remaining guards in the area into his cell one by one. And then he made his way to his father's cell.
Oh, shit.
He unlocked the cell with the guard's keys and immediately pounced on his father. And without saying a word, Pedro tightened his grip on the knife and stabbed his father repeatedly, counting each cut out loud. And when he got to 22, he stopped. Pedro stabbed his father one time more than the man had stabbed his mother. But Pedro had not forgotten his vow to his mother. In a final act, he took the blade and cut out his father's heart. He sliced out a large chunk and shoved it into his mouth. And then he chewed on it for a moment before spitting it out onto the bloody corpse of his father. His vow to his mother had been fulfilled. And he was bathed in the blood of satisfaction, and a feeling of righteousness washed over him. His mother's death had been avenged. And then he returned to his cell, released the guards, and allowed himself to be handcuffed.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Now,
Wow.
while in prison, Pedro continued to kill. But he did make friends with a man named Claudio. And see, Claudio was due to be released soon and really kind of had nowhere to go. So Pedro told him that he'd be welcome to go and stay at his grandmother's house until he got on his feet. Well, Claudio was very grateful and took Pedro up on the offer. And once released, Claudio went to Pedro's grandmother's house and foolishly started a relationship with Pedro's sister.
Oh, shit.
Now, everything seemed to be all right until one of Pedro's brothers accused Claudio of having a sexual relationship with Pedro while he was in prison. And Claudio flew into a rage, pulled out a gun and fired. He missed Pedro's brother. And instead, the bullet hit Pedro's sister and killed her.
Oh shit.
And Claudio was returned to prison.
You done fucked up now, Claudio.
Oh shit.
But of course, word had gotten back to Pedro about the incident. And Claudio wouldn't be confined to the cage for very long. Just days after, Pedro walked into Claudio's cell and cut off his head with a knife.
Holy shit.
And while in prison,
Damn. You know,
Pedro didn't play.
I'm gonna say this right here. I think that Ryan, you're onto something. I just don't think that I don't think he paid people off. I just think these guards were probably like, fuck this dude. If I don't do what he says, I'm next because I'm in his way of getting revenge. Anyways, go ahead.
Now, while in prison, Pedro didn't just murder other inmates. He also educated himself. He learned how to read and how to write. And he was finally able to read the numerous letters that were sent to him from the public. And many were fan letters, but many more were requests for him to carry out revenge killings on other prisoners on the letter writer's behalf. Pedro, in his own mind, was a man of morals, and he refused to kill for money.
Oh, however, what a good guy. Sorry.
However, if he felt the request had merit, he would happily oblige. And his preferred methods to carry out requests were either to beat his victims to death, stab them, or break their necks. And soon his infamy as one of Brazil's most notorious serial killers spread beyond the country's borders. Now he was not only receiving murder requests, but also countless love letters and marriage proposals, which in all fairness, Pedro found that quite strange. But eventually he did begin a relationship with another female prisoner. And after she was released, she would return to the prison to visit Pedro on conjugal visits. But the love and admiration that Pedro received from the public was largely due to the work of the media. Reporters constantly praised Pedro as a vigilante hero that fought against injustice and righteously punished those who harmed women, children, and the poor. And in a country where 10 to 15 women were murdered every day and roughly 60,000 are murdered per year, with a homicide conviction rate of less than 8%, the people wanted a hero.
Damn.
Now, Pedro had entered the prison system when he was 18, charged with 14 murders and a 126-year sentence. His confirmed kill count since incarceration had increased to 71. And because of this, his sentence was increased to 400 years. However, based on Brazilian law, the maximum amount of time that a prisoner can serve and is legally allowed to serve, regardless of the crime, is 30 years. And this 30-year rule had been put into effect when the life expectancy in Brazil was around 43, 45. Okay. And most prisoners in Brazil rarely survive for the full 30 years anyway. Many died of illness due to overcrowding and unsanitary conditions, and others were murdered in prison. Now, the warden realized that having a man like Pedrinho Matador among the general population was detrimental to his prison. He had bodies dropping left and right. So Pedro was transferred to another maximum security prison that had a psychiatric treatment center. Here, Pedro could be kept away from other inmates, rendering him unable to continue his campaign of vigilante murder. And in 1996, Pedro gave a television interview and was asked if he was released, would he continue to kill? His response was, "Yes, I'm a murderer, I always will be.
At least he was honest.
Yeah.
But despite his ominous statement, Pedro Rodrigues Filho was released from prison on April 24, 2007. He was 52 years old. And after 34 years in prison, he was finally a free man. Oh, and fun fact, Brazil does not monitor violent offenders after their release.
Oh, what? It's just like, here you go. Thanks for staying with us for 34 years. Just go have fun.
Now, while in prison for over 3 decades, the world had changed and everything was new to Pedro. He had never seen a color TV or used the internet. But Pedro wanted to live a simple life. He moved far away into a cottage in a rural area of Brazil where he lived with his pet Labrador. And he began attending church and found work as a caretaker on a farm. And his employers regarded him as a serious, hardworking, and religious man. But his newfound freedom wouldn't last. Authorities and politicians were not happy about his release. Most likely, they feared that Pedro would discover that they were corrupt and come after them. And they were looking for a way to put him back behind bars. And on September 15th of 2011, an anonymous tip led to his whereabouts. Pedro was arrested and charged with crimes that he had committed while still in prison, specifically for taking part in a riot and taking a prison guard hostage during that riot. And when he was arrested, he owned a gun, so they tacked on an extra charge of possession of an illegal firearm. Pedro was sentenced to 8 years in prison, and immediately the media picked up the story. Reporters were constantly visiting Pedro, writing articles and garnering sympathy for him. And with the reporters came the television cameras and the documentarians and the TV producers, and all wanted to capitalize on his celebrity status and his story. Well, Pedro served his time and was again released on December 6th of 2017 at the age of 63. He gave an interview shortly after his release in which he stated that he was done with killing. Unless, of course, someone harmed his family, and then the matter was out of his hands. And then Pedro teamed up with a man named Pablo Silva, and together they released an autobiography and created a YouTube channel. They would upload videos of Pedro retelling his own life stories, analyzing the crimes of others, and warning children about the dangers and consequences of a life of crime. They have over 200,000 followers and over 10 million views.
It sounds a lot like Sammy the Bull and Michael Francis doing the same thing right now.
And the name of the channel is Pedrinho X Matador. Pedro appeared to have genuinely become a changed man. He covered up his old prison tattoos and modified the one that read, "I kill for pleasure," by covering it with a scorpion. And he had the word revenge changed to love. And still capitalizing on the media interest, he made himself available for hire as a motivational speaker. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. I giggled at that as well.
Random as fuck.
And at the age of 67, Pedro Rodrigues Filho claimed that he was living proof that a psychopath could be cured. But he did say that he still experienced that urge to kill, but now it just fades away. Remembering, okay, so you guys remember the warning that his aunt had given him before the ritual, that if he ever caused harm, it would return to him? On Sunday, March 5th, 2023, the spell collected its payment. Pedrinho Matador was gunned down in the streets in the southeastern city of Mogi de Cruzes. He died of multiple gunshot wounds, and the suspects fled after the crime. The man dubbed the Brazilian Dexter was no more. And the FBI theorizes that there are 20 to 50 serial killers operating in the U.S. and roughly 160 worldwide at any given time. But that's just an estimate. Regardless of their motive, serial murderers commit their crimes because they want to. The exception would be those few suffering from a severe mental illness. Can they be rehabilitated? Studies have shown that the answer is a resounding no. A serial killer keeps killing until one of four things happen. He burns out or is physically incapable due to old age. He kills himself, he's caught, or he dies. And there are numerous TV shows, movies, novels, and true crime books devoted to the phenomena of serial killers. So you have to ask, why are they so popular? Perhaps we're fascinated simply because what serial killers do is so horrifying. We enjoy the thrill of the fear without actually having to live the event. Maybe we're fascinated with the psychology, the method, and the madness of an unstable mind. Or maybe we use our fascination as a tool to keep us safe, to avoid becoming a victim. Or maybe for some, the stories are used as instruction manuals on how to get away with murder. Now, like the character of Dexter, Pedrinho Matador lived by a code, a moral compass that he felt compelled to follow. Both the character and the man are a confusing juxtaposition of ideas because murder rarely comes along with a hero tag, which is exactly why they are so fascinating. Pedro Rodrigues Filho saw himself as an avenger of injustice and a hero to those victimized by crime, a modern-day Robin Hood. And why wouldn't he? Because no one is a monster in their own story.
Jeez, this man.
What a guy. Holy crap.
I like your little comparison photo you got there.
Yeah.
Thank you. I put that together myself.
What the hell, Shelley?
The whole time the story's going on, all I can think of is A, the Punisher, or B, Rorschach from The Watchmen. That's like
yeah.
I don't know who
Yeah.
they are.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
I know who you're talking about. I know who
I
you're
was
talking about.
fascinated
Yeah.
with the character of Dexter. I watched every season. The one with the Trinity Killer is the best season. I believe that's season 3 or season 4. I can't remember which, but that to me is the best one. When John Lithgow plays the bad guy,
Oh,
absolutely
yeah,
fabulous.
I remember that one.
Fabulous. That season is fabulous. Anyway, yeah, but the character of Dexter, I was absolutely enthralled with Dexter. I was fascinated by the fact that this seemingly normal man, to what he portrayed to everyone on the outside, was this killer who only killed bad guys because he was compelled to do so. Pedro Rodrigues Filho was the same thing. He was compelled to kill out of his moral code. Something I found very interesting about him, though, was the fact that I could not find one incident where he harmed a woman, a child. Could not find one. And I looked because I thought there has to be a crack in the code somewhere. There has to be. But for all today, and I left out stories. I left out a lot of stories, but those are the ones to me that were just kind of grabbed my attention and shook me. It's like these are kind of like his steps to, you know. And there were some stories about people he killed in prison. But what do y'all think of Pedro Rodrigues Filho?
Very, very interesting. Like I said, it reminded me a lot of like several comic book characters, or like several like, or a Tarantino movie. I don't know how this guy hasn't had
it is very much like a Tarantino movie.
Like,
and
that
fun
revenge.
fact, they are currently, as of today, they are, they had the series of Dexter, then they had Dexter New Blood. A prequel to the Dexter series is being filmed, and they're hoping it can be released in October, where Christian Slater plays Harry Morgan, Dexter's father. And I'm sorry, but the name of the kid escapes me, the one that's playing the young Dexter. So you get to see actually how Dexter became Dexter. So that's coming up.
Yeah,
that's coming up for you Dexter fans. Yeah.
So
Blake, what do you think of Pedro?
A multifaceted juxtaposition, as you said in your description of him. I have a hard time with characters like this because, on one hand, I get he's got a code. I get it. I get all of that, But there are other serial killers out there who live by a code as well. I mean, we've seen it across. They won't harm women, or they only harm,
Ridgway
whatever.
is one.
Yeah,
No.
Gary
yeah.
Ridgway
Mhm.
was an
I was like-
injustice collector as well,
Green River
because
Killer,
he
right?
felt like, yes, because he felt like
Okay.
he killed prostitutes because he felt like he needed to rid the world of prostitutes. He
Mhm.
felt
Yeah.
they were a scourge on the society. However, he did have sex with them. He did rape them before he killed them. So maybe his code was a tad bit cracked, but he was considered an injustice collector.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
No, I just I don't know. I have a hard time with characters like this because it's kind of like on one hand, weirdly enough, as oddly as it sounds to say this, I can understand his code with this vigilante justice, but on the other hand, I'm one of those that I'm like, all right, let's to that degree that this man took it.
Pedro
Mhm.
didn't play.
Let's
No, he didn't.
not like taking justice kind of into your own hand type thing, especially where it gets to me whenever like these fan letters start coming in. He's like, but if he felt it was warranted, okay,
If
you
he
know,
felt
I mean, I
that
get
there
it.
was a true injustice done, he could right
Right.
it for them. He
Yeah.
could kill that prisoner that was in jail and right the wrong in his
Yeah.
mind.
I don't know. It's hard for me to say that I can't label him as a hero, you know, because I'm
He's
sure that
not
there
a
are
hero.
some. Yeah, I'm sure that there's some in Brazil that would label him as a hero. You know, but I don't know the situation down there. I wasn't alive during that time. I've never lived there, you know.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
Well, that's
He-
also
he's the
vigilantism.
ultimate. Yeah, he's the ultimate anti-hero in my opinion.
Right.
He is.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know. I just
Well, like you were saying, that's a vigilante. A vigilante is one man's hero and another man's villain. You know, I mean,
True.
like I said, to kind of bring it back to comic books, look at Batman, look at Spider-Man. You know, like
He did relate
there's-
himself to Batman quite a few times.
Yeah, I
There's
was gonna
difference.
say-
Batman didn't kill people.
No, Batman had the rule. That was his moral code.
Yep.
Batman never killed.
That's right. But he did
well,
like to refer to
maybe one
himself as
time, but-
Batman. I just left all that out. I didn't want to put in. He did the Robin Hood thing about the robbing from rich and
Right.
giving to the poor. That was kind of his thing.
Mhm.
You know, he'd rip off drug dealers and then he'd go, take the money and pass it out
Mhm.
in the people that lived in the slums.
Right.
So they would have money for
You
food
know,
because
and-
he knew what it was like to sometimes not have your tummy full.
I think that, from your perspective, Blake, you were talking about how you don't think he's a hero, but I think just like morality, depending on where you are, I think that's relative, depending on your experience and your life experience. I think too, a lot of the Brazilians, who grow up in all that corruption and see all of this crime and everything happening to them, he was like a paragon of, yes, he's finally taken it to the people that are causing us all this pain and all these problems.
Someone was standing up for them.
Right. Now, as far as he himself, he did have a moral code, but we're kind of going to go into the nature versus nurture thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it was his head injury? I mean, we do know his head injury probably caused it because his cerebral cortex was damaged. But I don't know if he had grown up in a different environment, what else would he have done?
So the University of Glasgow actually did a study where they studied all of these serial killers, and they found that I think it was 22% of them at some point in their life had some kind of head injury.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a direct correlation to it's that lack of impulse control, that lack of empathy. However, I don't think just banging your head really hard turns you into a serial killer.
No.
I think there already has to be something wrong, something in the wiring.
Well, too, and that's kind of going back to what you were talking about with him being born with a deformed, skull because his dad kicked his brain in. Essentially, it happened to him young enough to where his brain was able to heal, but it had to create new neural pathways, and so the way he thought and the way he operated was way different than the way we operated. Because there was like, for instance, there was like a kid. The reason I say that is there was a kid he actually ended up writing a book. He was lobotomized when he was like 8 or 9 years old. And because he was so young when it happened, your brain is very plastic at that particular moment in time. His brain was able to heal itself and they created new neural pathways. And now he ended up growing up and living a normal life and being a doctor. And he wrote a book about it. So I think that maybe with Pedro, I think that maybe probably could have been what happened. His brain healed itself, but because of the way it healed itself and created these new neural pathways, he was different than everyone else and thought different and had to operate differently than everybody.
Well, and that's where, you're talking nature versus nurture.
Mm-hmm.
His brothers and sisters grew up in the same household with
Right.
a father who beat the hell out of them too, and a
Mm-hmm.
mother who loved them and tried to protect them, and really the only people growing up that Pedro cared about were his younger siblings, his
Mhm.
mother, his grandmother, and his grandfather. And they did everything they could to nurture him and take care of
Mhm.
him and teach him right from wrong and this kind of thing. And Pedro had a very defined sense of right and wrong.
Mhm.
It's either right or wrong, it's black or white, and there's no gray area. I think that's why when it fell into the category of being wrong,
Right.
that he reacted so violently and viciously to it.
And I don't disagree with you, but I do think because of the way his brain worked, I think that he had that uncontrollable rage that he had to get out of him somehow, and that killing was the way that he did it. So
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying on the nature part of it versus the nurture part of it.
I think that he was. I think that because of the head injury, I think he was born to be a killer.
Mhm.
I think that his brain did not work right.
Right.
It never worked right.
Right.
And I think that he could have been 1,000 times worse had it not been for the fact that he was
Mhm.
absolutely loved and adored by his mother, by his grandmother, by his grandfather, who worked
Right.
so hard to make sure
Right.
that he, or at least try to make him a good and decent person.
Right. Mm-hmm. I'm with you. I think that had he grown up in a more harsh environment, which his environment wasn't great to begin with,
No.
it could have been way worse. As his brain is developing and as it is forming these new neural pathways, and as it is, trying to correct itself, he is being taught this moral code by his grandfather and his grandmother and the people who care about him. So, but there's still that part of his brain where that rage center just flips
Mhm.
on, and when it flips on, you're fucked until he kills
Right.
somebody.
Right. How about you, Blake? What you think? Nature, nurture, combination of the two?
Oh man, I'm gonna have to go probably with a little bit of a combination of the two, just because I can't label it one or the other.
That's why he's so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, if I had to lean more towards one or the other, I'd have to probably lean more towards the nurture aspect of it. Like, I do understand he's got, the prefrontal cortex like is damaged and everything like that, but I just think the environment that he was raised in triggered something in. I think from the moment that the first time his cousin punched him, that it was just growing up watching his father be so abusive to his mother
and abusive to him.
And abusive to him.
He took punches from his father. I think he thought, I'll be damned if I'm going to take him from anybody else.
Yeah.
Right.
And this kind of, I think that was like a moment of, I'm not like you just said, I'm not taking it from anybody else. Like, screw this shit, and decided to basically squeeze the juice out of his cousin.
Mm-hmm. Literally.
Literally. I don't know. I'm gonna. I don't know. I think this has to do a little bit more with nurture, in my opinion, because I know that there are people who are born every single day with issues with the prefrontal cortex, and they don't turn out to be. I know that they have behavioral issues most of their life and everything like that. I get it, but I think had he not grown up in the environment that he grew up in, and instead grew up in a healthier environment, it probably would not have led to what it led to. In my opinion,
had he just grown up with that nurturing mother, grandmother, and grandfather, and left daddy out of it.
Yes, having brain issues and deformities and all that kind of stuff. At birth, that's one thing, but then you throw in the environment that you're growing up in, which is a very violent,
dangerous
hostile,
and
dangerous one. You kind of start to lean towards that. You're seeing it all the time, therefore you're learning it. It's a learned behavior,
right?
In a child. So I think that this one for me has to probably lean a little bit more towards nurture, because
and you're becoming immune to it.
I think that once his cousin punched him, I think that flipped it, and he was like, fuck this shit. I'm throwing you through the Jack LaLanne juicer. And
The
we're
producer.
I'm Jack LaLanne, and have I got news for you? This can
Every.
get blood out of your cousin, my friend. I'm sorry, we're not laughing at his cousin. We're laughing at the. Never mind.
That's
We shouldn't
all right.
laugh at victims, guys.
How was my Portuguese? My Portuguesa?
Portuguese.
It was good up until that moment, right then. It was great.
Portuguesa. I tried. I listened over and over to a lot of those. I was particularly happy that I got the death squad right and the I kill for.
Hold on, wait. So where did we land? I'm on nurture. Ryan, where did you land? Where'd you come in at?
I said nature because of the neural pathways that were formed. Yeah. I mean, but I'm on, like I said, I'm close to being nurture, but I think it's because of the way he was wired. He was the way he was.
And I am going to go nature because there are lots of people that have horrific brain injuries and don't become murderers.
Because
so I
of
think
the
in this
environment
case,
that they grow up in.
That's right. I think
Because
that
of the
the
nurturing
played
environment.
the bigger role than the injury did.
Oh, so you're going nurture then?
Yeah, nurture. That's what you said.
Oh, you said nature.
Oh, you said nature.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, you said nature.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad.
Ha! How's
nature.
it feel to be out there on that lonely little limb by yourself, Ryan?
I don't care.
My apologies. I meant to say nurture. I think I was still tossing it up in my head till the very last second, but I was like, no, nature is definitely going to be the head injury. I'm like, but again, there's all these people who have traumatic brain injuries and don't become serial killers. So I think it's going to have to be nurture. I agree. So anyway, well, any other thoughts on Pedro?
No, but I didn't get to eat
Rodrigues
any of
Filho?
my popcorn.
I
Y'all
think
suck.
I think that this is one that it's kind of hard to debate this one because of the fact that he did so many horrible things.
He did.
I don't think any of us are disagreeing on that.
I don't think any of us think he's a hero. I don't think any of us think that he was right in doing what he did.
No.
But again, I did watch Dexter and I did root for Dexter. So if I might have been growing up in that, in Sao Paulo or Santa Rita, I very well might have rooted for Pedro.
Yeah, exactly. It depends on where you grow up. It depends on, what your moral compass is. It depends on what your morality is, period. And morality is relative depending on where you go. And like I said, in Sao Paulo, there's a lot going on. So people are like, hey, this guy's it. Whereas us up here in America, we can be like, I don't know about that. Because our experience is different.
You have a lot of agreeing with you in the comments about rooting for Dexter. So,
well, and with that, Blake, do you want to tell them everything that they need to know?
Sure,
Dexter.
why not? We'll go Dexter.
Go back.
Give a few shout outs and not shout outs, announcements and all that kind of shit real quick before we let y'all go. Guys, we do have tickets that are available. We did put a new location on a couple of days ago. It is almost completely sold out. I do believe we only have one ticket left available. We've also got, I believe, only, I don't remember, 5 left for the other location. So if you haven't got your investigation tickets, go get them.
Is that for the one in September?
Yes, we've got tickets available for the Gray County Historical Museum, and I believe we only have one ticket available left for Yorktown.
Okay, that's my birthday.
Yes, that is Ryan's birthday celebration. So, yeah, I think we've only got one left on that one. So somebody go take it and come to Yorktown with us because it's going to be a fantastic time. So,
yeah.
But remember, After Dark with EVP, Season 1, Season 2, they are all out on Paraflix Paranormal Plus, all 16 episodes. So make sure you check those out with some of our special guests, like the crazy kooky Mr. Chad Wandell with Ghost Geeks, the Arkansas Tuberculosis Hospital on there. We've got Broadhead Banner. We've had some excellent pieces of evidence that we've captured. We have not showcased anywhere other than on After Dark with EVP. Paraflix Paranormal Plus is available on Amazon Fire, Roku TV, Apple TV, iOS, and Google Play. So make sure to use our link to sign up, which will be posted to our Facebook page tomorrow via our link tree, and is also in the show notes for you audio listeners. So that code is After Dark 25 for 25% off your annual subscription. I think it takes it down to like $37 for the entire year. Once again, we're going to post it up tomorrow morning to our Facebook. Within that link tree link, you will find every social media channel we are on, our online merchandise store, our public investigations that we just talked about, and our Patreon page. Our Patreon page, oh my Jesus, is the fastest and easiest way you could directly help support the show. For just $5 a month, you will gain access to well over, I think, it's close to 400 additional Patreon exclusive videos. Your support from this goes directly to the show and all the ghostly adventures that we get to bring you week after week. This price is never going to change. With that, you currently get the pre and post broadcast, which are the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after this live broadcast. I pray for y'all watching the pre-broadcast and more than likely the post-broadcast once we get through filming it, where we discuss things even further. We fight, we debate, we act goofy. Apparently, we're turning into somewhat of a late show. Yeah, that'll just forewarn you, and share a lot of personal things that we probably shouldn't ever have recorded. But it also includes our Patreon exclusive unedited investigation footage from places such as Squirrel's Cage Jail, Hill House Manor, and many others. So if you ever want to see our raw unedited footage, you can go over there on Patreon, but that is only where it's available. So don't forget, we offer a 7-day free trial for our Patreon page, so you can check it out prior to purchasing. Let's see here. If you want to spend some time with us, we do have a Paracon coming up in October. We will be at the Rock Island Paracon. Yeah, Rock Island Paracon. The very first weekend in October. So we will be up towards our northern friends up there. That is going to be October the 7th. Don't let me get the date wrong.
That's okay.
Right.
Look it up.
5th. October 5th. October 5th. Yes. So those tickets should be coming available pretty quick, or the link for it. So we'll post that as soon as we get it. But make sure you go over and follow us on all of our social media channels. Just search Everything Vaguely Paranormal and look for the green sound wave. And remember, to the audio listeners, you can always watch the fun video versions of this live on Facebook and YouTube each and every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. So these are all the ways you can directly support Everything Vaguely Paranormal, but we also appreciate your love and support for us through this: likes, comments, shares, views, and downloads. And remember, as always, any questions, comments, stories you want to share with us, those can be sent to us at the evppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Go like, share, and subscribe to that YouTube pages. Pages? Okay, plural. Why
Pages, sure, why not?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, words have gotten hard, and my brain is tired. So we want to thank you guys for watching Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Shelley Pruitt, my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts. Thank you for being with us, and as always, we will see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.